Now, there's no label on this form field. It's a spell book. Maybe it's intuitive that that's supposed to be the spell name, but it'd be nice to have a label, wouldn't it? How can we do that? Several ways we could do that. I'm going to show you 3, and we're going to permanently do the 3rd one. So you don't necessarily need to copy along unless you just want to have it for your record. So first, use a label element. What you actually want the label to say goes in the contents between the opening and closing tag. So I want to say spell name. And notice it automatically added a for attribute here. The for attribute is where you tell it which field it's actually the label for, and you give it the name. So if I type spell name in here, I'm telling it that that label is specifically for that input. Refresh. There we go. It's labeled. Now, if I didn't have the for attribute, it wouldn't look any different. So why do we do it? Why do we bother? One reason, accessibility. So again, if you're vision impaired or blind and you have to use a screen reader or other assistive technology to browse the web, you end up tabbing through things. And when you get to that input, you won't know what the heck that input is supposed to be because there's no label. But as long as you have the for attribute on the label, it doesn't even have to be next to it necessarily. There could be something in between. And it knows that that label goes with that input, and it will read it aloud, as expected. There's another way to do the same thing without using the for attribute, and that is to actually put the input inside the label. So put the label and the element itself inside the label tag, and that achieves the same thing. Doesn't look any different either, but that also labels it properly. We're going to do the hip new way and use one of those HTML5 attributes like autofocus. Anybody know what I'm going to do? You know how sometimes, well, heck, we see it over here, where it says message, press command enter to commit. As soon as we start typing, that goes away, right? It's kind of grayed out. What's that called? Placeholder. So just add an attribute to the input called placeholder and put whatever text you want to show up there. So I can say enter a spell name. There it is. As soon as I start typing, beautiful. I like it. Questions about that? So I said that was an HTML5 thing. These days, pretty much every browser that's in wide use supports HTML5. There's a website called Can I Use, which is a good place to look up features if you're curious. Is this CSS property supported by this browser? Or in this case, is this HTML attribute supported? Let's look up placeholder. 4 results found. Placeholder shown CSS pseudo class. That's not what we're dealing with. Placeholder CSS pseudo element. Input placeholder attribute. Here we go. So it is supported at least as early as IE 11. It's supported in all this stuff. It's all green. We're good. Known issues. 10 and 11 accidentally show placeholder attributes on text areas as their actual value when user enter HTML, etc. So 10 and 11, IE 10 and 11, do some funny things. None of that stuff seems like a complete disaster. We'll keep using it. So that's caniuse.com. It's good stuff. There's also a Visual Studio Code extension for Can I Use. There's actually more than one, I guess. So compatibility check for HTML and CSS. We'll see that in action here in a minute. But that's pretty cool. If you do need to support browsers that don't have some of these features, a lot of times there'll be something called a polyfill available. Anybody ever heard of a polyfill? So something like this. A polyfill is usually a JavaScript file that you add that looks for any of these features you're using and then tries to recreate that feature using JavaScript so that it will still work in an older browser without you having to go out of your way to write 2 different versions. So that can be handy if the situation arises. So this commit will add a placeholder to spell name.